Welcome to Adventures in Life. I'm Linda Rose, and today I have a special guest, Dr. Earl Beecher, who usually sits in this chair, and Earl has a secret. Welcome, welcome, Earl Beecher.
Linda, I'm nervous as the guest. As the host, it's fun, but as the guest, I feel like, boy, I better be...
Relax. That's right. It'll be as easy as falling into a
started off as I've got a secret. Now,
yes.
That's kind of scary in itself.
Well, first place we should say, for anyone who has ever missed Earl before, Dr. Earl Beecher is a professor of finance, and now he is in the record-producing business. How did this happen?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. Many years ago, I was reading something in the New Republic, I think it was, anyway, Socrates, and he made a statement to the effect that you can have the army, the navy, the police, all the political power of the government, and you let me control the music the young people listens to, and the young people listen to it, and I will control a nation in 20 years. And you know, that sort of stuck with me, and I began to listen to what my children were listening to, and it was drug-oriented, it was toward very loose morals. I had been a chaplain in the Army and a missionary for the church and very active. Very loose morals, people taking these things, you know, and I said, whoa, and you know, we are reaping the harvest of what was going on. And I thought, what can a person do about this? And I thought, well, maybe one thing to do is to get into the industry. It's not an industry that's easy to break into.
I'll say, and what a fascinating idea, though, to think that we could mold children's minds by our
well,
music.
when you think about it, Linda, don't the lyrics of the songs that you heard as a child run through your head even now?
Indeed. Even if I hear music, I hear the lyrics. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that this is very important that we realize this. And what the kids are hearing today are obscenities and profanities. I had a group call me the other day and said, gee, we'd love to be on your label. And I said, what kind of music? They said, rap. I said, okay, but I don't like dirty words. Oh. Well, that's what sells. I said, that may be, but it's not what I'm devoting my life to promoting.
God bless you.
Yeah, so that took care of that.
There's enough of that around. We don't have to worry, you know, have we sanitized the world?
Now you ask how I got into the business, how I got into it. I was driving home after a seminar one night, and Gary Owens was on KMPC at the time, and he played a piano version of Laura that I have always been into music. I had my own band when I was a sophomore in college, you know, that kind of thing. And grew up in the big band era, and I heard this arrangement, and it was just incredible. And I said, who is that? It's not Roger Williams, it's not Eddie Cano, it's not Pete Jolly, it's not Oscar Peterson, it's not Art Tatum. Who is that? And at the end he said, it's Paul Smith. Well, I spent the next 2 days looking, because I'd never heard of Paul Smith. How did I miss him, you know? And I eventually found the album. It's a Warner Brothers album. He sells Jazz by the Seashore. Well, on the back of the album, it said Paul lived in Palos Verdes, and he was playing at a club there. So I said to my wife, we've got to go hear Paul Smith. I've got to see this man in action. I just pictured somebody be there just sweating blood over the keyboard to play the way this man can play. We got there, and we walked in, and he was sitting at the piano like this and talking to people and looking around the room very casually. And I said, well, where's the tape recorder, you know? And finally I got around the side, and the hands were disappearing. And I said, this is impossible. This is impossible.
It's
Nobody can do
wonderful
this.
to see them in action.
Well, I played the piano since I was 5 years old. And so when I hear this, you know, I'm just amazed. Well, anyway, what happened, we went back the next night, and then we went back once a week, and we got to be friends. And one night at Paul's house, he said, well, my contract with Warner Brothers just ran out. I said, let's form our own record company. He said, oh, no, Earl. He said, no, no. I said, let's do it. You do the music, I'll do the business. He said, no, it's much too dirty a business. You're too naive. You shouldn't get mixed up in this. And he said, no, no, no. Well, he held off for 6 years. Finally, one day, I
You are a patient man.
No, I was working on him.
Yeah.
Finally, I came to him and I said, I have an album cover already printed. I said, would you at least freelance? If you're freelancing, would you record for me? And he said, yes. So we did. Only it took me 6 years to get him into it. I finally went to him and showed him this jacket. I said, you know, Paul, nobody knows your name. It's too simple. If we renamed you Engelbert Humperdinck, was what Jerry Dorsey went to, I said, I'll give you some outrageous name, or I'm going to put your name in shocking pink against black where they can read it a mile away. And he sort of laughed. And I said, I've got the jacket. Now, when are you going to give me the contents? It cost me a whole month's salary just to get the jacket printed.
I love it.
He said, that's blackmail. I said, yes, it is. Well, if the studio's available Wednesday night, we'll go in and do it. He walked in and sat down and did the album. It was a phenomenal album.
Genius.
After we broke the ice, Paul said, you know, I'd kind of like to do a solo album, playing some things, because I was crazy about the way Here's That Rainy Day turned out, and it's a ballad, so I finally talked him into do a whole ballad album. And he said, what's the painting on the cover? I said, well, I have a very dear friend named Vernon Kerr, and I wanted to do that. The first one, the master touch, I was trying to get the idea of a Paul Gauguin with Paul Smith. They're both masters.
Succeeded, yeah, it's beautiful.
And that was the intent. Now with Vernon, who is a very dear friend, he did the next few for us here. The Art Tatum touch. I got some wild reactions. People, I got one letter from New York that was just beautiful. The fellow wrote, and I can remember some of the wording. He said, how dare anybody compare himself to the master, Art Tatum.
Yes.
And I said, well, we weren't comparing ourselves. We were just playing in his style as a tribute or something. Well, anyway, he said, I sat down and listened to your album with the intent of taking you apart at the seams and returning your head in a paper sack. Now, I thought that's pretty clear. But he said, after listening to it twice, I was so impressed with Paul Smith that I played Art Tatum's Tea for Two and Paul Smith's Tea for Two back to back on the news. You couldn't buy this. This was on the news on the release, on WCBS, New York City, New York. And the reaction of most people when they hear Paul the first time, especially if they play the piano, is to promptly go into shock. Like I did. I haven't gotten over it yet.
I can't wait to hear these. This is incredible.
Well, I really don't have the capability. This one, Paul was telling me, he said, you know, I'd like to do an album with Louis Bellson and Ray Brown. I said, oh man, that's the dream team of all time. And I used to talk to some of the other musicians, and I said, we're going to do an album with Paul Smith, Louis Bellson, and Ray Brown. Now, inside the industry, they know Paul. Outside, I don't think the public knows him as well. But everybody I said that to, they go, man, that's heavy. So I called it heavy jazz.
I love it.
Well, I got royally yelled at by the critics. What do you mean heavy jazz? This is some of the lightest, most delicate, most beautiful stuff that's ever been done. And I said, well, I agree. It's the musicianship that's heavy. It's not the music.
And also, I think that's quite acceptable, heavy jazz. And Volume 2. Here
Volume 2. These three got into the studio, and they recorded the first tune. And when they finished, Louis said, oh, it's so fun to play with somebody who can really play. They did these 2 albums in 2 hours.
Yeah.
They were just like 3 kids having a ball. And some of the stories that are fun, Ray went over and whispered something to Paul, and Paul gave me a signal. And he says, don't record this, we're going to experiment. I said, okay. So I went back in the control booth where Don was, and I said, record everything. And he says, he said not to. I said, look, I'm the producer, hit the button! And he barely hit it as they started.
Yeah.
They did an 8-minute version of Take the A Train.
I was going to ask you, is
just
that
phenomenal. Yeah. And when they got through, the 3 of them started to lean back, and Louis says, once in your life something's perfect, and we didn't record it. And the 3 of them are sitting there, you know, kind of crying the blues together. And Paul signaled for me to come in. He says, well, how was it? I said, I thought it was wonderful, Paul. I just loved it. Good, we'll do a take. I said, don't bother. Well, don't you want it? And I said, well, kind of, yeah, I like it, but I don't think you need to do it. Well, make up your mind. Do you want it or don't you? I said, well, to be honest, we got the first take.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He says, what? And I said, he said, I told you not to. I said, so what do you know? I mean, this was one of my great moments. Billboard, in recording it, said, taking Take the A Train as a ballad was a stroke of absolute genius.
That Earl Beecher didn't turn off the recorder.
And what happened was Ray had gone over to Paul and says, everybody beats this tune up all the time. Why don't we try playing it slow? And as a result, it is gorgeous. This was a great album. The critic from Cashbox called me. I dropped this off at his office. I'd never met him. He called me and he said, Earl, this is the greatest jazz album I've ever heard. We're making it our #1 pick in next Monday's issue. And I said, wonderful. I love things like that.
This is fabulous.
This one cooks. I mean, this one cooks. We had Frankie Capp on the drums and Wilfred Middlebrooks on bass on this one. And the tunes in here move. We got into the studio, and after we were there, I was talking to Paul, and he hadn't decided what all he wanted to record. And I said, well, you know, I'd like you to do Laura. He says, well, that's on Warner Brothers. I said, I just would love to have it on my label. And also Kumana. He said, well, I haven't played that for a couple of years. I said, okay. He said, well, all right. We'll give it a take and see what happens. It's fireworks. It's incredible. Everything is a first take with this man. We walk in, we sit down, just listen. That's my daughter's portrait I had painted of her.
Wow.
And Paul says, how come you put your daughter on it? I said, she likes to listen to your records. He says, why don't we do my daughter? I said, you pay for the portrait and we will. Yeah, I'm very proud of her.
I don't blame you. Every reason to be. How nice to put them together, sort of a wedding in some way.
Then we did some novelty things with Paul, like the Chinese samba and so forth. And so going through the albums with Paul, I've done a lot. Now this one is sort of special. When we recorded this, he did The Girl from Ipanema. I was sitting there holding my breath. It was moving so fast and so clean. And after it was recorded, I took it over to KLON, where Ken Borges, a friend of mine. I said, Ken, I'd like to do something. I'd like to... When we recorded this, Frankie Capp said there was a chorus in there that didn't sound like a piano. And Ken says, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's just play that and you hear it. And I said, when we did this, I got the idea, I'd like to bring it over and just play it, announce to your listeners there's a drum and a bass, but challenge them to name what the other instrument is. So we had a little contest. If you don't mind, I lifted 20 seconds out of this.
Let's hear it.
And I've arranged, now this is just a home recording I did off the disc, so the sound isn't as great as the disc is, but if we could take just a minute, I would like to have us play that for our listeners.
Excellent.
Our viewers. Okay, now what happened? We played that on the air, and we said we'll send a free copy of the album to the first 5 listeners who can identify what the instrument is. Every light in the place went on, every phone, it was exciting. And the manager of the station came running, what's going on? We're just having a little contest. And we played that, and he said, what is it? And we said, well, you tell us. It took 218 phone calls before 5 people said a piano.
My goodness, well, now that's incredible.
They were guessing everything electronic under the sun. They said, that sounds like instantaneous electronic contact. That does not sound like hammers on strings on a 9-foot concert grand piano. Now, I'd like to play that same cut again and let it just go so you get a little bit more in context. And then you can see clearly it is the piano. So if we could pause just one more short session here, Linda. Anyway, you've got the idea. You can see. Oh,
wonderful.
I've never heard any other pianist who does this. Now, Paul, of course.
Well, we're going to just take a short break here because we have a PSA, and we'll be right back with Dr. Earl Beecher, also known as Earl Beecher, record producer. Welcome back to Adventures in Life. I'm Linda Rose with Dr. Earl Beecher, who is also a record producer, and we're just having a wonderful time listening to the music of Paul Smith and hearing how all of this happened.
When this was called Paul Smith at Home because Paul said, we went into the studio and he said, this piano just isn't giving me what I want. I wish we could do it at my piano at home. So we talked about moving the piano to the studio, and Van Webster, bless his heart, said, well, we could take the recording equipment to the home easier. So we went in and recorded this one, and the one was my daughter's portrait at one sitting. Paul plays like that. Well, what happened, the piano he had at home was this 9-foot concert Kawai, and the Kawai people heard it. I put in the minutes on the liner notes that he had recorded it at home on the piano, and that we'd had this contest at KLON, and they called me and they said, would you do a special pressing for us with our logo on it so we can give it to our distributors to show what our instrument can do? They were so excited over that, and I thought that was really fun because here was the piano company turning to the kind of endorsement that he was able to do. Now these two albums, we went into a studio again.
The two of you are such prolific people.
Oh yes, well, we got there and we hadn't picked out the songs to record. And I said to Paul, well, why don't you do an album of Gershwin and Cole Porter and Duke Ellington and Richard Rodgers? And he says, you want 4 albums in one night? I said, no, just do one side of each. These were done direct to disc. You hear the pause between numbers, that's the pause he took. And then he played. He played the whole side. Paul never makes a mistake.
That's wonderful.
He is absolutely just incredible to work with.
Sounds like you have a pretty good batting average yourself with this. How long, by the way, how long have you been working together?
Well, we did the first album in 1974, but I had first heard him earlier, as you know. Besides the ones that came out in LP, we have 3 that have just been released as cassettes.
Oh, how wonderful. So
and
we can drive and listen to Paul.
Oh, yes. Well, some of these have been reissued as cassettes, but this one I think is really interesting. It's his 50th anniversary in show business, and it has the Phantom of the Opera meets the Wizard of Oz. I said, well, there's 50 years between the shows. The Phantom is really popular now. The Wizard of Oz is my favorite movie. I had been bugging him for 6 months to do the Phantom music, and he says, the Phantom in jazz? Can you imagine the title tune played as a bossa nova? He did it, and it came out beautifully.
And then we have
the sampler,
which is
the CD, which I have just taken one tune out of each of the albums and just done it as a CD
just
sampler.
For your information, we have things like Yesterday's, Lover, Willow, Weep for Me, which is one of my favorite songs of all time, the Paul Smith theme, which must be wonderful and I haven't heard yet,
it's
The Man
like
I
cartoons. Love. Paul is Hollywood's favorite pianist. He did a lot of work with the cartooning companies, and his background is incredible. I once got him arranged to do a concert for the National Association of Jazz Educators, and they had never heard of him. And one of my favorite things is to get some smart aleck disc jockey who says, Paul Smith, I've never heard of him. I said, okay, he's been on 150 albums as sideman or star. 50 of them, he's the star. They're on Capitol, Verve, MGM, Warner Brothers, Outstanding, Discovery, Trend, Tops. He's been on Savoy. He's been on these labels, but he's done several albums on the major labels that I mentioned. And I said he was on the Dinah Shore Show as her accompanist for 12 years. He was on the Jack Benny Show, the Jimmy Durante Show. I've got a whole long list. The Carol Burnett Show. He was Ella Fitzgerald's accompanist the last 6 years, co-star accompanist. On Sammy and Company. I said this man was introduced on camera every show for 50 years. He was on camera an hour and a half a day, and nobody's ever heard of him. I even wrote an article for the Jazz Association's journal, and the title was, How Do You Hide a Man 6'5"? And you do it by putting him on everybody's television screen an hour and a half a day for 25 years.
That's absolutely right. Now, well, of course, anyone who would like more of this, if you watch at the end of the show, you'll just be given a number, some that is a number you can call to find out where you can acquire these wonderful treasures. I plan to acquire one today my very self.
Yes, you will.
Why did you call your record company Outstanding Records?
In the Army, there were certain ratings. There was outstanding, superior, excellent, good, fair. There were 7 ratings. Outstanding was the best rating. And I didn't know what else to call Paul's work, so I called it outstanding. I've had very interesting reactions to that because some of the critics, my favorite one, Flint, Michigan, the newspaper critic there, he did not like the heavy jazz album. He did not like a snow scene on it, even by Vernon Kerr. And Vernon is one of the top artists. There are more of his prints being sold by 5 major print companies than almost anybody else. But he didn't like that. He thought Outstanding was presumptuous. He really blasted me. The liner notes were by John Wilson of the New York Times.
Oh, I love
Why
John.
do you go for John, you know, or Dan Morgenstern on the first one. And he thought this was presumptuous. He just ripped everything to shreds.
John Wilson was the most important jazz critic.
Well,
for the
Dan
New York
Morgenstern
Times.
and John Wilson, there's no
Years.
two better.
Oh, I see.
And they both raved about the album, loved it. In fact, Morgenstern said the work of Ray Brown, this is some of his greatest work, and it's sheer perfection throughout the whole album. And, you know, things like this make you excited. But anyway, this guy...
You're not excited at all about this, I can tell.
He just tore me apart. He just said this album is terrible, except the music truly was outstanding. And I thought... I went to Paul and I said he hated everything I did, didn't like the jacket, didn't like the choice of the liner notes, didn't like anything, but he said the music was outstanding, so he liked what you did. And Paul just turned to me quietly and in his manner said, well, that's as it should be, Earl, you know. He kind of puts up with me, you know, it's
But
fun.
that's incredible. Your partnership has produced quite a catalog of work here.
When I got started in the business, I told Paul I wanted to do it, and he said no. And I said, well, if I start the company, will you record for me? He said yes. So I wanted to get all the necessary business clearances and licenses and fictitious name and, you know, the whole routine. And I went to Mr. Armentrout over in Santa Ana, who at that time was the head of the union there. And I said, I'm starting a record company. I want to do everything right. And Armentrout looked at me and he said, have you ever worked with a record company? And I said, no. Are you a musician? Well, I said, of sorts. I can get through the easy hymns to play the organ in church for people to sing to, but, you know, nothing fancy. And have you as a member of the union? No. No. Earl, what makes you think you can start a record company? I said, I want to.
Oh, how wonderful.
And he said, I'm all the time advising my students at school as a professor, do the thing that's dear to your heart. You can do it. You can do it if you want to.
And it makes your life so much more valuable.
Well,
yeah.
and you're going to do a better job at that. And he sort of looked at me in dismay and said, oh, really? And I said, besides, I've got somebody else who's really doing the music. I'm doing the business end of it. And my PhD is from UCLA in business, and I've taught there. I've taught at Long Beach. I've taught at Pepperdine, you know, Cal State LA, Irvine. And so I know the business end of it pretty well, but I've got another person doing the music. And he said, oh, who's that? And I said, Paul Smith. Paul Smith? I said, yeah. The big guy? I said, yeah. The pianist? I said, yes. He said, well, there's nothing like starting at the top.
Well, it's interesting. So there you were. You brought your business expertise together with the passion you had for music.
Yes.
To make this work, and you made it work.
Yes.
Which is an incredible success story.
Well, it didn't stop with Paul. I have been extremely fortunate in meeting other people who are wonderful. You know, there is so much talent out there. I want to take time to talk about the kind of talent that comes my way. I think our viewers can see I have a whole stack of more records that are not Paul.
Yeah.
And more cassettes and more CDs. And I don't know how much time we have left, but...
Well, we're winding down, so what might be really terrific, if you would agree to do this, is come back again, and then we could do another show on your music, because one of the things that knocks me out about this is your passion for this, because everything is, you're animated to begin with, but your whole face and your demeanor lights up, and it's wonderful, because hearing just the snippets of Paul's work, I can understand why you're passionate, but to be able to put those two things together is really a rare thing. Few people get to do this in life, and I really consider it to be the secret to everything. So is it okay sitting in that seat, being interviewed instead of?
I'm really having fun. I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, you couldn't possibly talk too much. It's about you.
It really is where I'm at.
Well, I tell you what, we will definitely do that then, and beg you and plead with you to come back, and then we can hear about it. Just before we go, just tell us who are some of your other
Tony Rizzi was a wonderful man. He was a friend of Paul's, and he was one of the great guitarists. And I did 2 albums with Tony. And this one I wanted to do in a disco style, and I wanted it to be based on railroad trains. So I took over the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, Take the A Train, Long Train Running, Blues in the Night, things that Chattanooga Choo Choo, Night Train, Love Train, and Sentimental Journey, all dealing with train trips, and especially the Atchison, Topeka, and I took it over to Tony.
It sounds weird. Listen, there's so much here I want to get into with you, and we really now are winding down. I'm getting my signal, which means it's time to say goodbye. And this is Linda Rose for Adventures in Life with my guest, who's usually your host, Dr. Earl Beecher, boy record producer. And he's going to come back and have another show with us. Thank you very much. See us next time.
Could we